Meta-Rick!
Welcome back to another episode of Meta-Rick, where we talk about the metaverse and spatial computing with startup founders, with agencies, and with global brands. Today's guest, we've got Ethan Berg. Ethan is the co-founder and CEO of Agora World, and he's solving a problem that he felt himself as a student with the complexity of creating 3D experiences. Now he's solving that through a no-code solution, and he's taught XR at UPenn and NYU. But specifically what put him on my radar was at CES this year in 2024, they were challenged to build a digital twin of Las Vegas in under 20 minutes. And what's really cool is I think they did it in under 10. And there's a great video on their website that kind of shows that process and how they did it. And instead of it just being like a 3D model, it also has these interactions where they were able to add other visual components and kind of layer things into it. So really excited to hear more about Ethan's story and to dive into kind of how you went about building Agora World. Before we dive into kind of your background and the founding story, maybe for the audience, you could just explain in your own words, like what exactly is a no-code solution for building 3D experiences?
What exactly is that? It's a hard question to say, right? I'd say the best way, I'll say it for my customers' words, which is Canva for 3D. I think the thing that I've come to recognize is that it's not necessarily starting from scratch, but rather looking at how others have done it in industries that are similar, graphic design being probably the most similar, I think we could argue. So, you've seen PowerPoint to the Google Slides, all the way up to the Canvas, the Figmas, right, that enable you to create rapidly and collaboratively. And I think that the 3D space is missing a lot of those components at the current moment, and that it remains where most of the complex work, you have to actually do it rather than it being done on your behalf. And so that's where I would say that I see it more than anything.
And what kind of sparked you in that journey, right? So it sounds like as a student, you were building 3D experiences. Were you mostly focused on learning like Unity and Unreal or Blender, or like what were you doing before kind of creating this no-code solution?
Yeah, so I guess to start back, from Philly, born and raised. I was at Temple University starting in 2016. While I was a student, I was a dual major at first, entrepreneurship, risk management, ended up dropping risk management because I didn't study much. I basically found pretty quickly that the cafe closed in the tech center and the library when everyone studies 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So I started selling coffee to everyone instead, just because for anyone that knows Temple campus, if you leave your stuff there, you will never see it again. And so that's no knock on the campus. It's a beautiful place, great school. It's just that's the reality. And so if you want a coffee, you're getting up, you're bringing your stuff, you're losing your spot, walking 20 minutes, and you're still spending $5 for a crappy 7-Eleven coffee. So I bring in a big box of Joes that I bought from Dunkin' and sell it to everyone there instead. And so I really leaned in on entrepreneurship because of that journey more than anything. I'm like, well, how do I build a business? And when I entered my junior year, my dad brought home a VR headset and was like, oh, you've got to try this. And I've been a big video game player my whole life. So I remember putting it on, shaking hands, like someone just random came up to me in the shooting gallery, started talking to me. You'd hear him in the ear like real life, and I shook their hand and you felt it. And to me, it was just like that was the most real experience I ever had online versus anything else. And I've got friends I've never met in person that I've just played video games with my whole life, right? But this just was so different. And so I had friends that were starting to graduate from school, move away. My family, I had some that weren't living near either. And a lot of the things we used to do together was go shopping. You'd go into a thrift store, you'd go, Nordstrom Rack, you go to the mall, whatever it is. And I just realized that, what if I could create an experience that would let us create the same memories that we do when we're physically together. And so that's where I started kind of leaning into the VR side. I was not a developer. I am still to this day coming at this from a very non-developer perspective. Could I use Unity? To an extent. Would I tell you should hire me specifically to build it? Absolutely not. My team is great at this. Where I am coming from is saying, well, why can't things be so easy that I could do it? And that's what really frustrated me. So just to give a little there, I can give more on the shopping side if you want, but that was the entry to it.
So first of all, I love that your comments on your like early VR experience come down to this like social interaction, because at Arthur, like that's our whole focus is like virtual collaboration, right? And this is something that's very close to my day to day. It's like most of what I do outside of the pod is helping enterprises connect their employees and get them working together in 3D spaces. And for me, that's always been a big part of VR is like, can two people from completely different parts of the world develop a more human personal connection together in a virtual space? And I think that's really, really impactful, and sounds like it was really impactful for you and kind of pulling you deeper into this. So when you first got started, were you trying to learn the more complex kind of coding experiences and kind of struggling with it? And that's what sparked the idea of like, oh man, like this is really hard stuff. I'd rather make something to make it easier. Like there's got to be a better way, right?
So that was a part of it. I'd say, unfortunately, I dove a little deeper than that, where I tried to learn the tools. I tried a bunch. I mean, Arthur was one of them. Honest to God, they've done a tremendous job with what they're with your focus on enterprise collaboration. I guess that would be the easiest way I could say, like your virtual office space, right? Arthur's done great. I tried Glue. I remember going and using the Decentralands of the world, the Spatials, right? Engage, RIP Alt Space, like everyone's kind of got this really nice neighborhood, but at the end of the day, the thing that uh, I ended up hiring people. I used the money that I made from the coffee to build a VR shopping platform from scratch. We spent 12 months, more money than I could admit, that I want to admit, building that. And ultimately, the market wasn't ready. It was 2019. Um, the market was not ready. And that was the harsh reality, was it hitting me and saying like, why did I go and spend that much time and money to build something that didn't work? I think that was what hit me the most. It wasn't even about it working versus not. I wanted to do it with my friends. That was the main goal. It was more of just like, why did it take so long to do this? Same with art. I could argue, similar for Arthur. Everything's been built from scratch. Why was everything? Why did everything have to be built from scratch? I think that's really where what kept hitting me is everyone in this space is building their own little neighborhood, which I think is fantastic. There's value to a variety of these platforms for different uses. But at the end of the day, the interoperability doesn't exist because we've all built it independently, and there's a lack of standards. No one's going to give up and abide to standards if it loses them revenue. If there's no revenue opportunity, unfortunately, just teams are not, the big teams that you need to adopt this, the Robloxes of the world, are never going to do it. And so I think that that's a massive issue. And then on the other side, I'd say that there are a variety of use cases we haven't seen yet. And so for those that haven't been built, do those teams now need to go spend a year and $100,000 or more to go and try that? I think that's insane. And so I'm more looking and saying like, well, similar to how I use Canva, or I go use Bubble to build an app, or I use Wix to build a website. Is it perfect? No. Does it get me 90% of the way there? Absolutely. And that's more of where I'm coming from and saying, well, if we can empower people to get 90% of the way there, I think we make a lot more progress. And obviously, we have tools available for professionals to make it that 100% of the way, right? Like I definitely don't think you should stick at 90. But I think that a lot of this currently is R&D. We don't know what's going to work. It's a lot of iteration. And so to spend more time and money to do that with constant learning makes no sense, because it is a rapidly moving, quick evolving space.
So this is interesting. It sounds like you caught the bug, right? I have interviewed a bunch of people about this now, and like everyone has this moment where like they kind of catch the VR bug or the XR bug, and they start diving deeper into it. You catch the bug. You've got this entrepreneurial spirit, selling coffees on campus, and then you try to create a virtual shopping center. So before you get into this kind of no code platform, that this kind of almost like Squarespace or Wix of 3D, first you tried to build an XR experience, or this tool. Talk me through kind of how that went. Even though it was too early, like how'd you get your first customers? What type of customers were buying it? Talk me through that kind of early
Yeah.
days process.
So it was built on the Rift S. So tethered, that would be version, number one. Um, so we ended up building out the entire thing. We ended up getting in touch with Shopify's VR team, partnered with them, and we actually integrated their software. So from my understanding, is still to this day the only VR shopping platform. The goal was to make it, if you have a Shopify account, you can link your products, have them available in a 3D store that you can interact with other people, right? And so we built that out. When it came to getting customers, that's where the issue hit. I mean, one of my best learnings that I had, I've always been told execution's all. The thing that I failed to learn until that experience was validate before you build. So that was a pretty good fail fast learning experience of make sure what you build actually has an end user or customer to it, so that now we don't build without that. But at that time, I was honestly, I was just trying to build something really cool. That was my vision. I wanted to build it for me and for my friends more than anything. I tried to get brands. The biggest issue was, again, it came down to content. There were minimal apps available for 3D models of products. This was before COVID too, so no one was doing 3D models of products, right? That didn't exist. And so, that scalability, not there. Photorealistic environments of stores, no one had an appetite for that. No one, people were in person everywhere. That never in a glimpse did people think that this would that we would transition this quickly. I think towards a more immersive world in this standpoint. So wasn't there. So we were at the point where we had to charge teams tens of thousands of dollars to build a storefront, right? And not to let alone the infrastructure to power it all. And that's where that's what's really hit me. That's what hit me home more than anything was, we built this infrastructure to power a social XR experience. But then to create the content, it's still going to cost just as much and take pretty close to the same timeline. And so that's what really was just hitting home to me is like, how is there not something that lets you design? And that's why we built on top of that infrastructure. We pivoted away from shopping and said, well, if someone wanted to build anything like that, what would we need to have available so that a store could create that storefront rapidly? And that's where our focus has really been for the past couple of years.
See, that's interesting because when I was at TouchCast, the big thing that we were doing was like metaverse showrooms for like automobiles, right? Like they have this big program with Fiat where a sales rep can dial into a 3D space and like in a video call essentially give you this immersive experience to sell cars. And I always thought of it like we never got to this point. It was very heavy services where like we'd have to custom build out these showrooms, and the code and everything was very unique for each customer. But this idea of like a Shopify in 3D was always very interesting to me, is like, how do you make it so a brand could literally just log in, upload their 3D assets of their cars, and then create that showroom on their own, and start just hosting meetings, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense why you would take that pivot from how do we help stores sell things in 3D to how do we help stores build 3D stores.
Yep.
It makes a lot of sense to me. With that, so you'd say the biggest hurdle was one, just early in the sense that people didn't have as much of an appetite. The virtual piece, everyone was sort of used to in-person or websites. They didn't need this in between as much. And then the second is the operations. Like they didn't have 3D assets. They didn't have a pipeline of kind of building that. Do you think this has changed with the combination of the pandemic and a more adoption of teams starting to create those pipelines? Do you think that that's different now than it was when you started?
Vastly. I'd say, I'd say it's different on a few ends. I mean, number one, technologically, I mean, I can take my phone out and take a 3D scan. It's pretty solid. Again, it gets me 80% of the way there. Is it perfect? No. Is it optimized? No. But it is there. I can do it on my phone, right? I think we've seen technologically, we've gotten way further on a process end. I think most teams are starting to build with that mindset of having 3D assets available for a variety of the things that they do. And I think that is also a huge plus. But again, I think it comes down to, okay, you have a 3D model of a product or of your building, then what? What do you do with it? And I think that's, again, now we're running into that barrier where obviously you've got the Matterports, come do a tour. Awesome use case. You've got, hey, I can have a 3D model on my product where I can spin it around or put it in front of me in my room. What does it look like? Awesome use case, right? IKEA's pioneered that quite a bit. And everyone's followed at this point. And so the thing though comes down to, again, like after that though, like then what? Like, okay, I spun it around. Like, did I really try it? Did I really feel the weight of it? Like, did I really get the experience I wanted to get? And I think that the answer is a no for a lot of those things. So I think that next step is where a lot of things, I mean, even Arthur's doing a lot of the things that we're working on as well, like social collaboration for the design process all the way through customers interacting with AI sales agents, to, hey, what about training? How does we've got Hyundai and Audi building digital twins of a dealership right now, where they can bring their employees to learn how to sell a car at a dealership without shutting down a dealership. Typically, you shut down a location, everyone's got to come in, which means travel time, potential risks, food, gas costs, all of this stuff, right? Now they can bring people there virtually 24/7, 365 with an AI trainer that's available helping them through the process, or an AI customer that's coming in and you learn by interacting with them, right? So I think that we're starting to take that next step in the journey where it's the internet's not necessarily going to be a lonely place to go. You're buying flight tickets to go traveling with your friends and you're on the phone. Why aren't we buying it together, at the kiosk, kind of like,
Mm.
I think, and it shouldn't be a literal kiosk. I think there's a much better ways to visualize it. But I more so am coming from the standpoint of just, I think there's a lot of experiences that would benefit from becoming more real than they currently exist. And that's really where we're leaning in and saying, well, you have to take it to the next step. That's where I think we can help you the most, is taking it from being just a plain model to I want to deploy training experiences, education, retail fronts, market research, even things like that.
I love the emphasis on social experiences, and that not all social experiences are like a concert, right? Like when you were talking about memories with your family, like going shopping, for example. Like I grew up in a small town, man. I grew up in Davis, California. It's a little farm town. We'd call the basketball courts the dairy courts because they're surrounded by cows, right? And for us, like I always joke that the things we did for fun was we'd throw knives at trees and we'd go to Target. Like that was it. That's all there was to do. And so something as simple as just like, I need to buy some shampoo. Let's go do it with the boys and have like two or three guys go to Target together and run an errand. Like there is these simple parts of life that are more enjoyable together. And then to your point, like a travel experience, you actually might be making that decision with other people, and you need to collaborate on kind of coming up with which flight do we want to take on which day and to which city and all those sort of things.
Yep.
Now, it sounds like you've got a background in the full-on VR in headset, and it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first store's tethered Rift S was like an in-headset shopping experience, is what you
Yes.
were looking to achieve. But then there's also this WebXR thing, and these kind of like platforms like Spatial that are creating like essentially a gaming YouTube almost, right, where people can just publish out these WebXR games. Had a great guy on recently, Jonathan Hale from Wonderland Engine, that's like Unreal Engine for WebXR, and it seems like there's a place for this too. And so I'm wondering what your take is on in headset VR experiences versus web based experiences. Where does one fit better than the other?
Yep. So, I mean, I'll make it clear. We actually pivoted away from VR back in 2020. Part because a part of the reason why it didn't scale was I built it for VR and my friends didn't have it. that was some of them did, but not everyone, right? It wasn't as accessible, and that was great learning. I think it was the most important one, honestly, out of almost all of them, other than validate before you build. Purely because I think that if we look at what people currently have today, um, most have a phone, they've got a tablet or laptop, and that's pretty close to worldwide at this point. And so I think that the important thing isn't that. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this here. Because, look, not everything's right on the web. Not everything's right inside of a headset. I'd say, could I spend a multiple days straight in a headset? Absolutely not. It just won't work for me mentally. Like it doesn't. I'll get nauseous. Eventually, I will hit a barrier. Um, and so I think that for certain things, you don't necessarily need to be inside of one. So ensuring that it is accessible to all, no matter where they are, vital. I'd say everyone has a different market as well. So some consumer bases might have access to X while others have Y. There's so many headsets out there too. You currently have to build individual, integrations with each of these. It's the compatibility side, another huge barrier on top of the interoperability. Accessibility is hard in this space. And so that's a part of what we're focused on is, well, how do we help teams deploy it anywhere quickly with a click? You decide, kind of a thing. I think that the website is really important for getting people used to it, because we're going to start seeing people move through it. And, most people, the first interactions I have with, I remember running a few career fairs. We did stuff with Philly Tech Week, right? And so for a lot of those events, a lot of the people there were first timers. Never in their life have they tried this. And so they'd come in and they'd ask questions like, so when I move through, I can hear different people like I do in the real world. It's like, yeah, like it's not just one giant 100-person call where no one's talking, only one person is. This works like the real world. You've got 50 individual conversations that are all somewhat overlapping based on distance, like being at a restaurant, right? And so you start hearing a lot of these questions of people getting interested in the idea that it is possible to make online experiences that actually feel like the real world, that feel spatial, right? Or spatial beings, feels human. I call them human experiences because it incorporates that human element, the things that we as humans desire and strive for, the things we need, and that social interaction is one of them, like that sort of thing. So I think it's a great way to get people in, plain and simple. Get them used to it, and eventually they're going to ask, well, or you can entice them with, imagine what it would feel like if you were inside of it, not just looking in, right? And I think that that's where people are like, interesting. They'll go to the Apple store and try it. They'll see, holy crap, that's amazing. And then right now, I think they're going to get lost at there's so many headsets at various price points. No one understands the tech specs. Coming from a non-coder perspective here, no one has any idea. I get it because I talk it every day, but a common person has no idea. They buy an iPhone because it's a blue text message that, they trust the privacy and they like Apple. That's it. And so the headset side, I still think it's slightly confusing. But I think Meta has done a great job at lowering the barrier. Vario is getting close. Their quality is great. Obviously, Apple's fantastic. I love the interaction. Still some ways to go, I think, so then everyone has it in their house. But we're definitely getting closer.
So interoperability. I was talking to Nick Mitham at Metaverse, and they rebranded recently. Don't know what the rebrand was, but I'm forgetting it. But anyways, great conversation. He's been around the space for a long time, and he brought up some really interesting counterpoints to interoperability that I'd love to get your take on. So with interoperability, there's like very little incentive to make it happen. On the supply side, when we're talking about platforms like Roblox and Fortnite and these kind of large scale virtual spaces, even if you think about VR chat or platforms like Arthur and like Engage and whatnot, it's like the incentive is to keep people in your ecosystem. Like you want to build a user base and you want to get people using your product more than any other product. That's how you build a successful business. And that's actually better for the customer too, because then they get these really curated, really optimized experiences just for them, and the business grows faster, can invest in itself and create the best possible product for that customer base. It's like the whole underlying reason capitalism works. But then this idea of interoperability sounds really cool, of how do we make sure that all of the models can talk to different platforms and how do they all work together. And so I wonder what your take is on like, what's the incentive? Like, what's the reason why that'll actually end up happening? How do we overcome that? Or if that's even like possible, if it's realistic?
It's a great question. I think it's a multi-pronged question, right? In that, so let's start. So there's a few things you said that were really important. So I want to touch on all of them. So if we start on the engine side, so if we look at the internet, we say the internet's a comparable, right? Like ultimately the metaverse is a 3D, it is the 3D internet. It is, the internet of today contains all 2D content, audio, text, image, video. And we're starting to move towards a spatial internet where the metaverse is really a layer on top of the internet that enables more powerful experiences that feel real, and incorporate spatial and 3D content, right? As well as real-time interaction. I think that that's a critical piece. So theoretically, one could argue that a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams is a part of the metaverse in that it incorporates a lot of that presence that you typically would not get on the standard internet of the past, right? And so, not that I'm here to say that, obviously vastly different than the metaverse platforms you typically talk about. But so that would be number one, is making sure that it runs similarly to that of the internet. And I think that incorporates a few things. Number one, engine. Obviously, it's all running on one engine in that I am accessing every website from one place. Currently can't do that with metaverse experiences. I need a variety of different types of hardware. Some, work with this browser, not that browser, for XYZ reasons. And I think that's a huge issue. Unreal doesn't port to web really anymore. They're not supporting that as much. That's a potential issue. I understand why they do it without question. The type of experiences they are doing and they're aiming at building are not necessarily for a web experience. They're movies, it is media, it is being delivered natively, or streamed in via video, not me having real interaction with the space. And so, given that makes sense, but it also, again, comes into question of necessarily take something from Unreal to Unity. And I'm not here to say I can do that with everything on the internet, because obviously once you incorporate gamification elements, physics, different types of coding, like, it certainly muddies the pond a little bit. Um, I think where I'm more coming from is, I guess there's two angles that, again, back to what you were saying, that I think is possible. Number one is environments and assets. I think that that's first. Um, one of the things that we're leaning into pretty heavily is similar. I can go make a graphic design in Canva, Google Doc, whatever. I can export that as a standard file. I think everyone should have the ability to do that. Well, one of the things we're building into our platform pretty soon. Right now, it's closed, and that when you build it, it stays. Soon, we will let you export it as an FBX, GLTF, OBJ. You choose, because wherever you're going to take it might have a different specification, right? I think that that's critical, though, because who wants to go and build another one? That stinks. I've had to do that. It stinks. So I think that that's one that we definitely can do. And that obviously brings in avatars, identity, and things like that too, especially SSO. We're just going to integrate it with Google. So, I sign in with Google, sign in with Microsoft, whatever it is, and 95% of accounts are going to be made already anyway, in sync with everything else. The other area of interoperability that I think needs to happen is social XR infrastructure. And I think WebXR is doing a really good job. Chronos Group does a really good job. But I think that one of the things we have been leaning into quite a bit recently is the idea of open sourcing some of our engine, the way that we built our social XR infrastructure. And the reason why we're looking at that is I look at what WordPress did, and I think they have made a great model for how someone needs to build in our space. There has to be an open source version that, come get up and running quick, host with them. But if you want to take it yourself and host it yourself, you should have the right to do so. And that's one of the things we've been leaning into, because I think that is going to lead to more interoperability. If things are built upon a similar infrastructure, I think that in turn means everything's interoperable to one another. Even if your app is way different than mine, we built on the same layer, which means we talk to each other to a certain extent. And when I think about that, I think that to me is probably the only way that the bigger teams will begin to adopt foundational systems like that, because they'll have to. Because if a mass is creating on this open architecture for the closed ecosystems, where again there's a value to being closed and having people stay, I agree 1,000,000%. But you're going to want to bring people in from the open and saying, hey, we offer XYZ way better. Don't lose everything you built, but we can port that over. And I think that's where we'll start to see teams fold a little bit on the idea of like, well, I'm going to make this slight pivot because I know it's going to open up to this large community that clearly is interested. They're using a cheap, easy, let's get out of the box model, but we offer a way more customized thing for this use case, and I know we can help them better. And I think that to me, that is the road to true interoperability. Will we get there? I don't know. I'm really hoping so, but I'm curious your take, honestly, on that as well.
I actually love your answer. And I love that you didn't fall into crypto super quickly, because I feel like a lot of people, when we talk about interoperability, decentralization and blockchain comes up super quick with a lot of folks. And I'm not anti-crypto by any means. Look, I've dabbled with NFTs. I've got a portfolio. Like I think there's interesting things happening with the blockchain. But I think that it's pretty unrealistic to migrate the entire spatial internet on chain from the beginning.
And no one cares.
No one really
Unfortunately,
cares.
that's why I didn't mention it. I agree with you. I'm in on it too. Sorry for a quick diversion
Go
here,
ahead,
but
yeah.
I agree with what you said. And the only thing I'll throw out is, again, as a non-developer, I agree with the principles of decentralization, and it should be a core part of this. And blockchain and crypto help with that a lot. I won't be here to say that current systems can't do those things, because a lot of them actually could do those things if built in a way. Given that, my mom could care less. She really doesn't care at all how it works. Not once has she asked how her Facebook works or her email. Doesn't matter to her. All she cares is that what she wanted to do happens. And so if crypto or blockchain helps with getting that done, awesome. But I don't think it has to be a core marketing principle for everyone in the world to know I am Web3 enabled. Do we use it? Sure. Do you need to know? Not really, unless you ask, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't change what you're trying to accomplish. And that's more of why I didn't mention. So I agree with you.
Yeah,
Agreed.
no, I think you're 100% right. It's like if you talk to enterprise companies, they care a little bit about like how data is stored and transferred, and there's like all these IT security things you have to go through to talk about like where your things are being stored on AWS and like what type of data are you taking in and all that sort of stuff. But if you're talking about consumers, it's like when has a consumer ever even asked about an AWS server, let alone a decentralized blockchain network? Like
Yep.
it's just never going to be a question. But the things that could be interoperable, and there's a lot of folks kind of politically pushing one direction or another on this right now, is asset types, environments, things like that. We're starting to see trends with like .glb files becoming really popular. NVIDIA's pushing, what is it, USD to try and make that a
USDZ by
standard.
Apple.
There's a lot of that happening, and I talk a lot about how the 3D file is kind of the JPEG of the future, right? Like we're gonna be able to generate any image with AI pretty quickly. Like we're kind of almost there, but 3D work still takes designers and creativity, and that's going to take a lot longer for AI to be able to do on its own. Although AI could completely change this, right? Like it could make it easy to transfer one 3D file to another, and there's a lot of unknowns there. But something I wanted to touch on because you mentioned WordPress, and there's a lot of parallels here with what you're building as a no code 3D building tool to WordPress and Shopify and all of these kind of 2D website builders. A key difference, though, is that your experiences are so much more social. I think most of these platforms are like a brand builds an experience, and then kind of individual users come to the site, click around, and then convert down a funnel and either check out or subscribe or do whatever their call to action is. Versus with your experiences that your customers build, I imagine that's a little different. So how important is community in your process, like with agency partners or with events or your own experiences you're building? Like, how do you think about community with Agora?
Yeah, I mean, agencies is a great way to start. I mean, that's who we mainly work with. Non-coders are not buying. They try, and then they get 80% of the way, and then say, "I can't deploy this. I need it 100% of the way," and they go to a professional. That's how it works. About 90% of the time. And so, given that that's the case, we work pretty heavily with agencies. I found that they're kind of disregarded on a lot of platforms. High fees to get started and build. High fees on the transaction side of things. It's difficult for them to make money, and there's a lot of limitations for what they can or cannot do. And so our goal is to give them an open canvas, and we give affiliate revenue towards them as well. So if they bring customers to us, we'll gladly give some back. Work like the current model does for a lot of those things. So I think that that's vital, because when people come to us, I want them to work with the right people in order to ensure that what they're getting is what they're looking for. I want them to build it their way. The second thing is active community is critical. While ours is a closed ecosystem in that when it's uploaded, you can't export it from it yet. We do let you embed it on your own website and white label. So that would be a critical piece of what we do, because no one cares about me, unfortunately. I care about me, but my customer probably does to an extent. But at the same time, like, their customer cares about them. I think my mother, to go back to her again, I love using her as an example. She did it best, where I remember showing her some of the retail stuff we were working on, and I asked her, where do you want to go? And she said, I want to go to Nordstrom's, right? Not I want to go to their virtual store or their metaverse, or I want to go to Spatial, to see their store. She wants to go to Nordstrom. And that's what hit me of, the consumer cares about the brand they're working with. Therefore, why is my name there? And so we do a lot of work with them purposefully to ensure that they can brand it their way. Obviously, the slight downside is, when we market it as a discovery, most people are visiting it from their website, not necessarily from our platform. And so, slightly different in that I'm not looking at as much as helping with engagement as I am with delivering a great experience to those in your community where they already are going, which is your site. You don't want them on Facebook. You don't want them on your Instagram page. That's a way to get them to your website. And so we want to put it where that matters. And I feel like that's on the site. But it's made a lot of internal experiences for team training, more than anything. I
I,
hope I answered your
I,
question.
I like the way you think about this because it's a big differentiator between you and like a spatial, because spatial is essentially like I always compare it to YouTube but for 3D. So it's like a lot of like, even if you scroll through it, right, it's like all these different squares that are windows into 3D worlds, and then you click into them and then you can play a game or explore an environment. It's kind of like what flash games used to be, right? And like Adventure
Addicting games.
Quest
That's
and
what we used to use. But yep,
addictinggames.com,
yeah.
cartoonnetwork.com, all that stuff. And what you're talking about is a little different. It's like you're building a tool set so that a brand or a developer, whoever's building these experiences, can build something that they can use. And it doesn't necessarily have to live in your kind of ecosystem or your library, but the idea that they could embed it on their site or their own place that their customers actually want to go. I think that's an important differentiator.
And yep. And the other thing I throw out just very quickly, I mean, one of the areas we've leaned into a lot recently is the idea of like digital twins, like photorealistic creation. So we launched a tool about 2 months ago where type in a place or an address, and within 2 minutes we can create a 3D model of it, give or take, for 2,500 cities in 50 countries. And so we're very quickly starting to lean into the augmented reality side too, where it's like, hey, you have people come into your store. How do you increase their experience when they're at the store? A lot of things from Wayfinder. How do I find something in my store? Where is it located? And it will show me where to go inside. I'm constantly wandering in a Walmart trying to figure out where is this section. It's buried always. And so I think to a lot of ways, like, a Wayfinder experience or coupons or, some sort of interactivity with products in a physical environment. I think that that's going to bring a lot of things to life as well, and encourage people to come together in the real world, not necessarily just exist on the virtual end. Again, I mean, I am certainly not one, despite building a virtual platform, I am certainly not one to say the virtual world's better than the real. I think that the virtual world needs to become better than it is to feel more real. But it is in no way, shape, or form better. Do I think it could be better? Maybe eventually, but I think if it's done the right way, it would make our real world experience greater and less virtual. You know what I mean? The more real it feels, the less time online you're spending. At least that's kind of my perspective. Because, with AR especially, you're encouraging in real world social interactivity. And I don't know.
It's
That's where I'm going.
under talked about, in a massive opportunity in that. How do you make brick and mortar better? Because people do go shop in person still. That has not died. Everyone keeps saying it's dying every year. It hasn't died. I really hoped one of the takeaways from COVID would be that stores would completely change and kind of upgrade how they set their stuff up. You got Nike, you've got Amazon, and you've got Apple. There's like a couple companies doing a really good job with brick and mortar, but then I think most brands are still kind of doing the same thing they've done for decades and haven't had a lot of innovation. So I love that that's something that you're thinking about, is digital twins, parallels. How do we kind of enable a physical experience with these digital tools that are new?
Yep. And
Um,
if you build a digital twin of I guess a store as an example, right? Like, not only does that digital twin work for like augmented experiences in the real world, but now you also have a virtual experience pegged to the same thing. The information and content you put into that AR geolocated experience exists virtually too. So people that can't show up there physically can get a very similar experience you'd get in person. So that training, sales, product interaction, I mean, you name it,
well,
it's a hybrid.
sorry to cut you off, but tying back to what we talked about earlier with your experience with your family in the shopping store, my experiences at Target, it's like, imagine if instead of FaceTiming your mom, you're walking through the store and she could pull up a website with that same store on her computer, and the two of you could essentially be walking through the store together while one's at home and one's in person. There's some really cool stuff there. Just being conscious of the time,
What if you could see them
I
and
have an
hear them?
even better, right? And that's
Uh
where
huh.
these glasses need to get better and less goofy. We'll get there. But another question I wanted to get into, because on this show we like to talk about go to market a lot. I think that's an underserved topic in this space. There's a lot of creatives, a lot of technologists, and some of the questions we've talked about today are a little bit about that, right? Like how you think about your customers and the use cases and those sort of things. But with this kind of idea that you've said a few times now, validate before building, and like when you think about the persona for this new tool that you pivoted into, how did you go about validating the market for that? And talk me through what a typical buying committee or a typical customer looks like.
Yeah. So I guess on the first side of the validating, like how do we validate before building? It's a hard question. There's always too much to do. I've got a very good sounding board, great advisors that I've surrounded myself with. Michael Potts from Polycount, fantastic builders. I'm getting his perspective. Louis Rosenberg, who invented augmented reality at the Air Force back in the 90s. Stephen Borkel, who was a founder of Real Networks, so internet streaming, digital mapping back in the 80s, and Richard Ward, who led Enterprise at McKinsey. And so Enterprise VR at McKinsey, sorry. And so, we've surrounded ourselves with a great team of advisors that are coming from a blank state mindset where it's, before I was born after it was invented. So, yeah, I'm assuming you as well to an extent, right? So, we're coming at it from a, what have we seen versus what could it become? And so I think that's very important. But then we also have people rooted in, here's what teams are telling us today is needed. And that's not the discount. We have great customers I also lean into, but I really I've been starting to do a better job at questioning, here's things I'm thinking, not be afraid of asking, here's something I'm thinking about. What are your thoughts? Because there's great insight that comes out of that. And when you ask those that you would say are trusted confidants, whether that's an advisor, customer, partner, you should hope if they're trusted, they're not going to lead you the wrong way. And so for me, it's gathering enough data from individuals that I would say I think are very, very smart and know their stuff, and then taking those into my own consideration and kind of deciding here's the best bet, just based on all of the data that I've been able to bring into one. And through all of that work, I mean, look, I've been doing this for 5 years now. So would I say it's an easy road? No. I mean, most of this has been failures, just overcoming and learning from things that we thought might have gone one way and they went a different way. Why didn't it? It's a great learning experience. And what I've basically come to find is, our persona is really, it's an agency or a contractor. It is someone hired on the behalf of brands. They're internal on a brand, building on the behalf of somebody else. They're not building it for themselves. They have then another customer, an end user that will be using what they are building, or buying what they are building. They need to go faster. They need to be cheaper. They need to make more money. They need to save time. We take a lot of the energy away by handling the infrastructure on your behalf. Done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And those teams are typically building training experiences and educational, I would say would be number one. That is hands down number one. That could go from drone training to cybersecurity education, universities as well, all the way to product training. How do I teach my customer how to use a product? And so I'd say like that would be the main thing. They're working with enterprises and businesses. That's not to say we don't have small, medium-sized businesses coming to work with us, but I'd say that unfortunately, again, like the tool sets in general are just not quite there yet. There is a lot of work still to be done. Every day, I think teams are coming with cool things that are going to lower the barrier more. And so I think we're starting to see more uptick for them, but it's typically trending towards enterprise. I hope that it starts moving the other way in the future.
Yeah, I've experienced something really similar. I think enterprise is the first to adopt this stuff, and the consumer side is going to be mostly like AAA games, like blockbuster
Yeah,
experiences that is still built by an enterprise and then just scales to massive eyeballs to make it worthwhile. But for the most part, those internal use cases are definitely on the more popular side.
it's where games are
Um,
going. Just glorified advertisements.
Totally. I mean, yeah, immersive advertisements, pull you into it. It's like makes it a story.
It works. It
It
works.
does. I've had this idea forever, and I put it out there publicly all the time. Eventually, someone will go do it. There's people doing kind of versions of it, but this idea of corporate gaming, like that's kind of what all this stuff is. It's like gaming tech for corporate use cases. I don't know if you've seen the Spotify TV show, but they go into
No,
each.
actually.
It's actually really good. And there's this whole trend of like We Crashed and the Spotify show and all the Apple
Oh, yep.
biopics, and there's this trend in like people glorifying the idea of founding and building something. And with the Spotify show, they did a really interesting thing where each episode goes through a different employee persona on the founding team, and it's the same scenes for the most part. Like some of the same conversations happen, but the tone of the voice completely changes based on the
That's cool.
perspective that you're in. If you're the legal side versus the CEO versus the marketer, sometimes the dialogue even changes where they remember the conversation differently than the other person did. And so to me, I'm like, what a great way to create empathy for your employees if you created a video game of the founding team or just of the leadership team or something, and you have your employee play through the different characters and
That's so funny.
and you build empathy for each of the different departments, right?
That's a great idea, actually. We have our team, the first thing they do when they join our team, intern or team, everyone builds their own experience that tells about you. And so you
Mm.
design it, you pick a template, design it from scratch, up to you, and you put in images and videos and all these things to tell me about you. And then they give a tour to the rest of the team where you're the tour guide and you tell us about you. I learn so much in those versus almost anything else. It's amazing, honestly. And anyone can go back, so they can go back to mine if they want. Go back to my other team members. It exists forever, so it's there.
I love that.
The
Yeah.
playback's a good idea, though. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, but what you're doing there is super innovative too. I mean, one, you're dog fooding, right? Like I prefer the phrase "sipping your own champagne." Like if you're not going to use it, who's going to, right? So I love
Yep.
that you have everyone on the team kind of go through that, and then it creates that empathy. I know we're kind of right at time here, but Ethan, like I came across you through that CES activation, and it's been following you on LinkedIn ever since. It's amazing to actually get to meet you and hear more about your story. I would definitely love to run this back later on, get you back on here and do a kind of a deeper dive. I think we got a good vibe together. But before we hop off, anything you want to plug? Like, where can people find you? Anything you're working on that you want to share? We'll
Yeah.
throw links in the description and everything too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, definitely find us on our website, agoraworld.io. You can find me on LinkedIn. Definitely connect with me, Ethan Berg. I would love to hear more about you. I'm also happy to help. I share insights constantly and stuff that's going on in general. So please reach out there if there's anything I can do to help. Interesting things we're working on right now. We'll be in Hong Kong in 2 weeks. So for a huge pitch competition with Hong Kong Science and Technology Park related to building a smart city. So that'll be really interesting. And I'd say that the main products we're building right now is basically a large world model. So the ability to generate full-scale simulations and prediction mechanisms using 3D visualizations of anywhere on Earth with no code. And so if you're working in the digital twin space, the simulation training, that is what we do, and we make it easier. So please reach out. Would love to collaborate. Honestly, thank you for this time as well, Ricky. This was great.
Yeah. Had a blast, Ethan. This is awesome. Agencies, builders, folks working in the space, please shoot Ethan a follow. His LinkedIn and the website and everything will be down in the description. Otherwise, that's the pod.
I'm Meta